Blue Beetle was honestly a lot of fun to watch, even though it does follow your typical superhero movie formula, so let's talk about this movie. As always, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts or my TikTok and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Blue Beetle. So when I first saw the trailer for this movie, I was super excited because this movie looked awesome. However, I will say I did feel like they showed a little too much in the trailers at that point, but now that I've seen the movie, I can say they didn't show too much. This movie is probably one of the better DC movies we've gotten, even though that bar is not too high to begin with, but I really enjoyed this movie. It was a lot of fun and had a lot of heart with the family aspect, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but let's get into what this movie was about. So this movie obviously follows Jaime Reyes and his family, and once Jaime is chosen by an ancient scarab, he becomes, well, the Blue Beetle, and now he must take down an evil CEO and their corporation. Getting right into the good, and the first thing I have here is the thing that really held this movie together and gave this movie its heart, and that is the family aspect of this movie. I mean, everything involving Jaime's family was just great. It did have some Shazam vibes, but I think they did it better. Each family member had their own time to shine, and they each helped Jaime on his journey in this movie. And this really made the more emotional parts of this movie that much better because we knew and cared about each of the family members and what happened to them. And this was clear to see in the part where Jaime's dad died. Not only was this the most emotional part of the movie, but it was also one of the best parts of the movie in my opinion. And I think this scene worked so well because earlier in this movie took the time to let you know how important Jaime's family is to him and his journey. So when his dad finally did die, it made it hit that much harder. And it also did a really good job at making you feel what the family felt during that scene. And I also love how they didn't just brush over this death like a lot of other superhero movies do. They really made this death mean something in the end. And also, I just have to say, Nana was probably my favorite family member outside of Uncle Rudy because she was just awesome, especially towards the end of this movie. And next up for the good is Xolo Maridueña as Jaime Reyes, and honestly, this might be one of the best castings we've gotten for a superhero movie. Now, the way I picture Blue Beetle in my head is exactly what we got on screen here, so I really appreciated his performance. And I really love some of the commentary / dialogue we got when he was fighting in the Blue Beetle suit because it really reminded me of a lot of the dialogue that we got in the Injustice video game. Xolo was fun, charismatic, and overall just really likable in this role. And I mean this when I say this, but I think when we're looking back on this movie in 10 years, I think he'll be in the conversation as one of the best superhero castings ever. And coming into this movie, I had really only seen him in Cobra Kai, so it was really cool to see a more fun, lighthearted version of him. And next up for the good is Uncle Rudy, aka George Lopez, and honestly, he was probably the funniest part about this movie. Now, this movie was pretty funny overall, but he was really that main source of comedic relief in this movie, and honestly, he was funny in just about every scene he was in, and his character also had some more serious emotional moments with Jaime that I thought really helped grow Jaime's character in this movie. I loved all his quips and one-liners in this movie, especially the whole Batman is a fascist thing, which the more you think about it, Batman kind of is a fascist, but overall it was just really good to see George Lopez on the big screen again. And finally for the good, I have the action in this movie, which in my opinion was such a breath of fresh air because in these superhero movies you get a lot of quick cut action sequences, and in this movie there was a couple short one takes that were just awesome and just felt so fresh for the superhero genre, and I wish more superhero movies would do this because it just looked so cool in this movie. It also helped that the suit, which was awesome by the way, was actually practical, which made these action scenes feel so much more real, and they didn't really need to rely heavily on the CGI in this movie when it came to the action scenes. Yes, that third act was a mostly CGI kind of cliche fight, but I really appreciated the moments where we actually had someone in the suit doing these moves because again, it just made the movie and that scene feel much more real, and it didn't necessarily pull you out of the movie. So at the end of the day, this action was really good and honestly is probably some of the best action we've gotten all year from a superhero movie. Moving on to the so-so, and here I have the story. Now, the story was fine overall, but I did feel like I'd seen it before. It was your pretty typical run-of-the-mill superhero origin story movie. I mean, this movie definitely reminded me of like 3 other superhero movies when I was watching it. I mean, we had Spider-Man with just the overall way Blue Beetle acts and his quips and commentary while he's fighting. Then we had obviously Shazam with the whole family aspect, even though I do think this movie did it a lot better than Shazam did. And then third, we had Iron Man with the whole suit up, especially with the villain. There's a part in this movie, I think it was when the villain first suited up, that it looked exactly like Iron Man. But one thing I did like about this story is that it was pretty self-contained. And in a time where we're getting lots of superhero movies that are dealing with the multiverse and these big world-ending events, it was really refreshing to get a movie that was just really self-contained and was a super small story instead of dealing with the end of the universe. But all in all, I do think this movie does get the short end of the stick when it comes to the story because of all the other superhero movies that have come before it. And if you really think about it, if this movie would have came out in the early 2000s or kind of right around when Iron Man came out, I honestly think we'd probably be looking back on this movie today as one of the best comic book movies that we've gotten. But sadly, at the end of the day, it came out in the year 2023, so it is a movie you may have felt like that you've seen before. And finally, getting into the bad, and this is really my only genuine dislike about this movie, and that is the villain, because overall, the villain was just not good in this movie. We had Victoria Kord, who was the CEO of Kord Industries, and her sidekick, I guess, in Carapax, and they were both just super cliche and really bland as villains. But one thing I hated most about this movie is that Carapax was just a meaningless villain throughout the entire film until the very end, where they decided to give us his whole backstory to get us to care about him. And it was a pretty sad backstory, but when you dump it right there at the end, it didn't really make me care about his character anymore. I really wish they would have just sprinkled that backstory throughout the movie, because I think that would have made him a much more compelling character, and it would have made us care about him even more, making that final battle between him and Blue Beetle that much better at the end. And honestly, if I would have went into that final battle knowing Carapax's backstory, a part of me probably would have been cheering for him because I would have cared about him and not wanted him to die at the end. But at the end of the day, Blue Beetle is one of DC's better movies, and it is a lot of fun, and the family aspect gives this movie a lot of heart. Xolo Maridueña is amazing as Blue Beetle, and it has some great action scenes as well. And even though this movie does follow your typical superhero movie formula, it is still definitely worth the watch. Those are my thoughts on Blue Beetle. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shop easyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.